This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
Another series of clanks beat on the fuselage as ice lifted off the wings, and Jens felt relieved that the de-icers were working. She remembered having once said she would never bail out unless both engines were on fire. But this seemed a perfect time to reassess her position. She wished she had a parachute so she would have a chance to make the decision for herself. The new parachutes with which they had each been so carefully fitted had been sent ahead from the States with the squadron's equipment, but never arrived, or at least were never found. Someone somewhere, somehow, had made the decision that they could fly without them. Evidently, someone had concluded that since patients wouldn't have parachutes, nurses didn't need them either. Jens had a persistent feeling that although air evacuation was trying to prove itself, nurses were expendable. Anyway, here they were. But where? A horrible thought filled her mind. There was not one soul on the plane who knew. Wham! Everything on the plane clattered as they flopped dizzily for a few seconds during a rough downdraft. The engines sounded as if the wind had almost blown them out, and they were trying hard to catch up again. It was nearly 1300, and their aircraft had been buffeted about for 5 hours. Jens was certain that she had forgotten what a smooth flight was like. There had been no further communication from the cockpit, and all chatter had died in the cabin. Jens examined the faces of the sergeants. Most of them looked very concerned, if not outright scared. No wonder, she thought. We seem to have only 2 options: hit one of the mountain peaks, or run out of gas and crash. Neither was very comforting. Jens decided to do what she could. She straightened out the musette bags on the seat next to her, making a sort of mound. She loosened her seat belt, slid down, and placed her head on the makeshift pillow. Sleep had always come easily to her, and she hoped it wouldn't desert her now. She felt terribly weary and strangely relieved as she closed her eyes. She couldn't shut out the roar of the motors, but she converted it to a constant hum and drifted off to sleep. Jens awakened to the pilot's voice before she actually saw him standing in the cockpit door. "We are going to land," he announced. "Where?" the question rose as from one voice. His only response was, "And buckle up tight, because this time it's wheels up, and it will be rough." He disappeared into the cockpit. Jens turned to Elna to get information she was sure she'd missed while sleeping. "Where are we going to land?" Jens asked. "On the ground, I hope," Elna said with a toothy grin. She squirmed to get a better look out the window. Through a hole in the clouds she could see flat land. They were losing altitude fast by making a very tight turn down through the opening. Jens pulled her seatbelt tighter and looked at the young sergeant. He had stopped shaking and was tightening his seatbelt and staring straight ahead. The extreme turns were making Jens dizzy and had left her stomach in the clouds. Glancing at the radio knobs and buttons on the bulkhead, she placed her head on her knees and wrapped her arms firmly around her legs. One lesson from the survival course surfaced, and she repeated it silently to herself. There are usually 2 jolts in a crash landing, whether on land or on water, so keep your seatbelt fastened until you are reasonably sure that the aircraft has come to a stop. But once it has, clear out quickly. Planes don't usually float very long, and on land there is always a good chance of fire and explosion. Jens braced herself, interpreting the sounds of the motors to mean that a crash landing was imminent. To her delight, the plane touched down and was rolling. Thank God, she thought, the wheels are down. She tried to raise her head and found that the plane's momentum had her pinned in place. The same force caused the line of nurses beside her to slip forward, pressing their weight against Jens, and she against the bags and equipment in the first bucket seat. In a split second, the plane stopped abruptly. The tail flipped upward, and the nose buried itself in the ground.